three of these characters share one thing that puts them ahead of everybody else. They can destroy weapons. Hello, ladies, gentlemen, and non-binaries. Welcome to the Chamber of the Wraith. My name is Barbara, and it's been a little while since we've done a combat cast. A WraithCast, there we go. And this one is going to be about disability and disability representation stuff, it being Disability Awareness Month. Me, being on the autism spectrum, this is something very close and near and dear to my heart. And we have a new person who is joining us. Mono, unfortunately, could not quite make it, but they were able to provide some notes for us to use. So, don't forget to be awesome, my friends, and let's get started. Hello!
Hello.
There we go. All right, now we're just going to wait for our third, and then we will be on our way. I'm just going to go shoot them a quick message now. Oh, I think they just popped in. Hello! Ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries, this is Juliana.
Hello, it's nice to meet you. Hello.
It's always nice to have a new person on board. So, because you're new here, we'll just quickly run through the usual ground rules of how this works. We usually have bullet points, as you can see in the chat, that we talk about. And we alternate who goes first, and we work through the cast, then the next person would start. So, for instance, what disabilities, if any, do you have? Honey, if you'd like, you can start us off with that.
Sorry, I was eating just now.
Don't worry, that's a mood.
I'm having some very good Caesar chicken salad.
Yum. So, I
am autistic.
Hey, a fellow autist.
Mm-hmm. I also have some minor motor limitations in my fingers and reflexes, but nothing that's been diagnosed or labeled or anything like that.
Right on. So on the autism spectrum, you have some motor issues, for lack of a better word. And right on. Is there anything else that you wish to disclose, or is that about it?
I don't have any other things I need to disclose, Valen?
Right, so I actually also am autistic, so that might be all of us here, I don't know. And I have fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain condition. So for me to be able to get out of the house and do work, so able to move and not be in constant pain all the time, I have to use a manual wheelchair in order to have energy for everything. And I've been using one outside of the house for 9 years now.
I remember, Juliana, you were talking to us about or talking to me about the fibromyalgia before I got you in the server, and it does not sound fun.
It is not fun. I do try to focus on the positive side, which is my wheelchair looks really cool.
Hey, gotta take the positives wherever you can. Plus, you can deck out your wheelchair however you damn well please. Wheels, spikes, make it as punk as hell. And you would be correct, Juliana, in the assessment that indeed all of us here are on the autism spectrum. I mean, 1% of the entire population is currently believed to have autism, so I'm not terribly surprised. But I also have generalized anxiety disorder, potentially some type of depression that has not been fully diagnosed yet, and essential tremors, which just means I'm naturally shaky, and nobody knows why. So, yeah, so that's all of us. We're all on the autism spectrum and such. If you guys have, or if anybody who is listening / viewing this whole shebang wishes to bear witness to, or wishes to disclose their disabilities and their stories about said disabilities in the comment section down below, we would be happy to hear from you. Now, next up we have your favorite disabled character, and Juliana is actually going to start us off on this one, because that's how we roll through this.
So in terms of like my all-time favorite disabled character is Barbara Gordon, aka Oracle from DC Comics. She uses a wheelchair and is a computer hacker. There's tons of disabled characters I love, but she's my all-time favorite.
As Honey knows, that is also not wrong for me. But
prior to this video, Barbara had to make an active effort not to dedicate this entire video to just talking about Barbara Gordon.
Yeah, so I have a couple of other examples that I'd be willing to talk about because it's so hard not to because she's so damn cool. But you also had something else that you wanted to talk about that had a lot of disabled representation.
Yes.
I'm all ears about that.
The other story that it's like, when I hyper-focus a character, it's normally like with a ton of different appearances where you can just like read a gazillion comics or whatever. Just like what I consider my favorite stuff, but one of my favorite stories is Mi Piedra Rosetta, which is My Rosetta Stone. It's a play, and it's currently in Spanish. I do not believe there's an English translation, but it follows 4 characters. 2 of them have disabilities. One of them is, so we have Bruno, Victoria, Ariel, and Nuda are the characters in the play. And the 2 characters who are disabled are Ariel, who is deaf and played by a deaf actor in the play, and Victoria, who uses a wheelchair and is played by an actress who uses a wheelchair full-time in the play. The reason why it's one of my favorite stories that involves disabled characters, there's like a ton of reasons. And when we get into what we would like to see, I can use some more examples of that. But is because it obviously was created with these characters and actors in mind. So it's not like if you see your stereotypical Hollywood tearjerker or whatever, because it almost always is a tearjerker in Hollywood, where they're like, the story is about the disability and we're going to make the audience feel really sad, which is obviously a very ableist narrative. Instead, it's like these actors approached the playwright, actually, and wanted to know if he could write a play for their troupe. So it was written with the disabled actors in mind, and they were not going to be like playing some stereotypical role that an able-bodied or able person expected them to play. Like Victoria, she in the play does not hit any of the tropes commonly associated with disabled characters that are ableist. She does express difficulty with her life, but it's not because it's so hard to be disabled. It's because society is inaccessible, and she specifically states when she's talking, like, the state won't pay for me to have an assistant, so she can't leave her house as much. Or, like, there's the stairs here. So when these characters, and, actors who are interpreting the characters, talk about disability, it's not in the realm of disability being what makes their life difficult. Even if they can have difficulties in their life due to their disability, it's due to not like, oh, I was born or became through an accident somehow different and broken. It's like society does not accommodate people who are like me. So that's not a very common narrative in fiction. And I'm pretty sure part of it is because the playwright was thinking so much of the actually disabled people he was writing for when he wrote it. And that's like a whole common theme of the story. Also, I don't know how long you want me to go on about this, but is like what to live for, like the question of suicide, but it's not one of the disabled characters who poses the question, which is also something you see frequently in tearjerker, like ableist movies. The disabled character is very depressed about their life because they're disabled. Victoria is not shoved into that role, neither is Ariel. They're like sort of the, I guess, more mentally, not like mentally stable, but like they're more happy with their lives than one of the able-bodied characters. And they're helping him.
Neat. That's Yeah, this sounds like a really sweet play. I'd have to check it out sometime. And this is the first time we've ever actually had a stage play talked about in the cast. So this is... I love expanding the media reach that the WraithCast has. We'll soon have all the media. We'll become Disney, but good. Anywho, before we move on, Mono, who was unfortunately not able to join us, actually left some notes for us in the show notes in a new channel. So I'll be able to read off the notes for them. Hi, notes from Mono. Apologies I couldn't make it tonight, but I'm glad Barbara made the episode theme around disabilities. Very nice topic to cover. To answer the second question, there's a lot of choices I can make here. Oracle is a good one, thanks. And Jax, Briggs, and Kenshi from Mortal Kombat are iconic characters I love, but I wanted to shout out two characters in particular. Symmetra from Overwatch is the first. Not only does she have a left robotic arm, making her one of the many disabled characters playable in the roster, she's also autistic. I think it's really incredible that such a cool and elegant character doesn't end up having her disability and autism portrayed in a negative light. Indeed! She's one of the few playable characters in gaming to my knowledge, and I personally hope we have more. Any comments on Symmetra before we move on to the second character?
She's really fun, and not in terms of disability specifically, but she's one of the examples of characters who had to be completely redesigned from the ground up because their mechanics did not really suit a desired playstyle out of the audience.
Interesting.
Do either of you play Overwatch?
Not really.
No, sadly.
So, in Overwatch, there is Symmetra is one of the characters, and she was initially designed as what is effectively called a defensive character. That was a small subcategory of characters that was initially like a whole quarter of the game were listed as defensive because they expected players to swap to defensive characters when they were playing on defense and offensive characters when they were playing on offense, and didn't take into consideration that just 90% of casual players just want a main and that's all they want. So, Symmetra, though, as a character who is basically a trapper. She sets up these little turrets on the ground that have lasers that latch onto you if you're within their line of sight. And if you get hit by it, you take small chip damage as well as are slowed down by the lasers. And the more lasers that are hit on you, the slower you become and the more chip damage you take. So, if she throws up a bunch of turrets around a doorway, and you walk through that doorway, you're basically just going to get melted in an instant. And so, she's really dangerous when playing on defense, but there are specific counterplays you can do around that. The problem is, because of how her kit works, she's not very fun to play on offense, and a lot of people didn't like that they could not main her the entire time on all their gameplays. Even though there were some actually really cool streamers who were maining Symmetra on offense and doing pretty well with her, it was a very highly skilled gameplay style that most casuals couldn't perform. So they completely reworked her playstyle to allow for the turrets to be used more offensively and completely change her tool and playstyle by giving her... She's the only character in Overwatch who now has two separate ultimates in the game, one for offense and one for defense.
So they made her more flexible, is what I'm hearing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It was the forgetting the word off the top of my head. It was the whatever. It was what they did to try to make everything work to try to please everybody. It was their compromise.
There we go. It was their compromise for Symmetra.
Exactly.
And then number two, here's a fighting game character, which always makes me happy. Baiken from the Guilty Gear series is a really kick-ass example. The series has confusing lore, so I'll try to keep it simple. Yeah, Guilty Gear definitely does. A catastrophe in the past ended up leaving Baiken missing an arm and an eye, as well as her family and home. Throughout the game, she's revenge-driven and fights using a sword, a strange claw, and other weapons, all with just one arm. It's surprised how many disabled characters exist in fighting games and how many of them are still able to hold their own regardless of the circumstances, and she's extremely cool while doing it. This is actually a point I do want to bring up because she also brings up Jax and Kenshi. Jax, in Mortal Kombat, lost both of his arms through circumstances depending on the version of events, and he gets really tricked out, souped up mechanical replacements that are able to fire energy waves and stuff. And then Kenshi is blind. He gets blinded by the sword that he ends up using, but because the sword is mystical and gives him telekinetic powers, he's basically Mortal Kombat's Daredevil with telekinesis. So, yeah, a lot of fighting games have disabled characters in one way or another, which I think is actually kind of interesting.
Have Mortal Kombat ever done any, like, slice of life stuff to, like, show what Jax's life is like when he's not using these super weapons as combat tools? Because I imagine the actual, like, if these things are designed to be massive power weapons to deal out huge damage, they probably don't have a lot in terms of fine articulation.
Actually, they kind of do. And if you'll permit me a second, in Mortal Kombat X specifically, I also forgot to throw in the background audio, so give me a second. So in Mortal Kombat X, after the events of Mortal Kombat 9, Jax actually retires from warfare. He retires from war because war was a traumatic thing. He actually died, got brought back to life as a zombie, and then got effectively cured of his zombieism. So, but he never grew his arms back. They were just these things. So in Mortal Kombat, Jax is actually a farmer for a large majority of the game. So he actually has different designed arms. As you can see, they're a little bit leaner. Like here they are in a pose, as opposed to when he comes back to war, because he is effectively a consultant for the Special Forces. You can see that he actually does have different arm designs throughout, and they play around with this a lot, where different skins have different arm designs, and in Mortal Kombat 11, you can actually choose different arms as gear pieces, so you can throw on whatever arms you would like.
That's cool.
Yeah, so, and actually all the way back in Mortal Kombat 3, when he first got these arms, one detail I kind of wish they kept is there's this, like, back plate thing that I think is supposed to be like a neural interface.
Yeah, which is a detail I really like when people detail cybernetics to, like, actually, like, show how they connect to the nerves and all that.
Exactly. So, and in the Mortal Kombat Defenders of the Realm, I believe he actually takes off his arms.
Oh?
Let me double check, because I don't know. I can't remember if he takes off the arms or if the quote-unquote cybernetic arms are actually just covers over the arms. I can't remember for the life of me. This was a cartoon from 1995. Oh, and then another character from Mortal Kombat who is disabled is Cabal, because he gets almost burned alive and has to wear a respirator in order to breathe. So, yeah. It's one of those things, is like, wow, this is a surprisingly common thing, and I kind of dig that there's at least some effort going there. Is it perfect? I don't think so, but very little is, you know?
The Jax thing, the farmer character in Mortal Kombat, did remind me when I was doing research on prosthetic limbs. I actually did, like, find the article talking about it, where, like, they were trying to give the fancy new high-tech prosthetics to this guy, and he had, like, the really expensive one, and he was a farmer, so it did not actually work as well as the simple prosthetics. It just, like, has a little hook or a little small thing for the hand, because fancy articulated fingers, they can't do as much. They couldn't do as much for him, so I thought that was a neat detail that Jax also changed his arms based on what he was doing.
Exactly, and it changed his arms based off of his origins, and then you have so many different varieties of arms too, like going to Mortal Kombat 11 specifically. Yeah, because the Jax Classic from 1993 is one such example, where I just need a good look at all of the arms. No, there isn't any very easy to reference things, but there's different types of arms where it's... Oh, actually, here's a relatively good example to kind of give an idea. It's 720p, so the icons might not be the largest, but as you can see, you can kind of look closely, you can see different types of arms. Like, some of them are bulkier or leaner than the others, so I think that's actually a really cool detail. Poisonally.
I'm looking at... Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure I'll get better examples later on. Now, I have to talk about my favorite disabled character. I share it with Valen. It is Oracle. She is a wonderfully disabled character, but because between Juliana and I, we could talk Oracle for probably 2 or 3 hours. It might actually make for a good 0.5 episode where we just bounce Oracle ideas off. I think it would be cool to talk about another character who, like Barbara, is a genius-type character who is also a hacker who uses a chair, but also does field operations with his chair.
Oh?
I want you guys to meet the brains of Sly Cooper's operation, Bentley.
Oh.
Right at the end of Sly 2, he suffers a massive injury that renders him a paraplegic. But he does not let that slow him down. In fact, he
lets him being a turtle slow him down.
Well, the thing is that he was always the genius and the tech guy. So what he effectively did was he modified his chair to be able to store a bunch of gadgets and stuff so that he could also do field work if need, and he does quite a bit of field work. Like, he has rockets, he has a magnet on a fishing pole so he can pickpocket people, he has a sleep dart launcher. I think this art right here kind of exemplifies how crazy Sucker Punch went with Bentley. And this was in 2004, I need to emphasize. And then in 2013, they went even further with Bentley's technologically modified wheelchair for Sly Cooper Thieves in Time. But I've been working on a video on and off for some time now that is like comparing these two super smart chair-using individuals and how one company just shits on their disabled rep, left, right, and center, it feels like. And then while we haven't had a Sly game in almost a decade, they did not take that opportunity to when the company when Sly 4 was made, they didn't take the opportunity to re-able him, despite the fact that there's like ghosts and crazy immortal owls and stuff. They were just like, he should still be in a chair. And I appreciate that, somebody is willing to look at a disabled character and go, they're not helpless, they're badass.
Do really appreciate that too, and I know the risk of getting too oracle-y. Lots of times DC fandom does sort of downplay her physical competence. Like they'll say, she used her brains and not her brains. But she also was badass, and very few instances we did get to see her fight. It was very cool. So it's nice to see that happening, in that game, and to hear that they are not doing the ableist magic cue.
Oh yeah, and one thing, and the most important thing I think that is really key with this, here's another really great example of what I was talking about earlier with how Sly has frickin' rockets in his wheelchair, is that they made the hacking sequences really fun. And I think this is an example of how really good game design does not let disabilities get in the way, which is going to lead me to quickly rant about Gotham Knights, because they had Barbara as Oracle, then made her Batgirl again, then to try and cover their asses, they talked to this Abled Gamers Foundation to try and be like, hey, what kind of injuries could Barbara have healed from and stuff like that. It's like, you guys could have saved yourself all of this trouble if you had just left Babs in the wheelchair as Oracle. Or just not done the Killing Joke thing and have her not have been injured in the first place?
Yeah.
There's bending over backwards, and then there's bending over forward so far you end up bending yourself backwards, and that's what WB Montreal did. And yet, I'm looking at some of these games that are almost 20 years old with their disabled rep, and it's like, if frickin' Sucker Punch can do better than you guys in 2004, and then Sanzaro does it better in 2013, what are you doing?
I mean, to be fair, it took them 40 years to really acknowledge the mental trauma and anguish that Jim Gordon was going through. They've never had a good track record with the Gordon family.
What do you mean to mental trauma and anguish that Jim Gordon was going through?
Barbara Gordon wasn't the only one who was basically raped and beaten in Killing Joke.
Right, because Jim was shown those images in an effort to drive him crazy. That's gonna mess anybody up. And then
he was also just physically beaten to the bloody pulp as well. But yeah, also like showing somebody like hardcore traumatizing pornography of your own daughter is 100% going to traumatize you.
No, I don't agree with that. I do agree with that, but I don't agree that it took 40 years to acknowledge that, because in the stories right after Killing Joke, we do see it focusing on how angry Jim is actually privileged over Barbara. Like, we see one scene in one Batman comic, I can't remember, where he pretty much comes to Barbara and he's, like, sort of making the Joker thing her problem. Like, he says, she's talking about how, you know, blah, 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 it's past, you know, like, I'm me now, there's nothing wrong with me, and he's like, it's not the same. And then he's like, I'm worried I'm going to kill him, basically, if I find him again.
And
so
in No Man's
DC
Land,
is very...
And in No Man's Land, he does shoot. He does shoot Joker in the leg.
So I do think DC does show how it affected him, and that's part of why it became sort of like an example of that trope where they were both traumatized, obviously, but specifically the trauma shown like sort of how it affected the male character than how it affected her before Jim Ostrander and Ken Yale started taking control of her.
Indeed, but but I know where you're coming from too, honey, because it's like that doesn't really get explored again until Jim Gordon Jr. shows up, right?
Yeah, and even that's not even like until like I can't recall of them really like diving into the stuff that happened to him until the recent Joker run.
Juliana might have a little more into this than I do, because they actually tipped me off on several Oracle stories that, you know, I didn't know about. So might be something to explore.
Yeah, I feel like it's because the way that comics handle male trauma and female trauma differently. Lots of times when they have something happen to a male character, they pretend it's not traumatizing. Like, they have done stories where a male character is raped, for example, and they just pretend that's not what happened. When something similar happens to a female character, it's not like it's handled better. It's handled in a different way, still according to sexist tropes, which is, instead, it's focused on how bad it makes the male characters feel, and the narrative puts the action in the male character's hands. So you have the original narrative of Killing Joke before Barbara Gordon, before Kim Yale and John Ostrander took over. You have Longbow Hunters for Green Arrow, showing how, like, Black Canary basically gets tortured and sexually assaulted, so the Oliver Queen has an excuse to kill somebody and be dark and edgy.
One thing I really like about that particular thing is they actually address the conflict with that in the following Green Arrow series, where they have the exact inverse happen to Oliver, where he gets started tortured and Dinah has to rescue him, and Dinah is actually attending therapy over the fact that she was never given the ability to resolve her own trauma over that incident because Oliver took it from her.
See, I stopped reading after we got to the plot arc, right afterwards, where basically, so this is just the first 6 issues of Green Arrow, where, like, their therapy was, like, just literally on the screen. It was just showing making sure she still feels okay having sex with Oliver. So I'm glad to hear they do it better later, but I stopped reading because of how badly it was handled in the initial arc. Since it was only focusing on her relationship with Ollie initially, and very little on him or she thought. So I'm glad to hear they did improve that later.
I would definitely recommend reading it up again because it's one of my favorite Green Arrow series of all time. It's a really good read.
Yeah, so far the author has been giving me very little face. Maybe if you can tell, like, say, the specific issues that we see Dinah going through this stuff, so I don't have to read through a bunch of stuff.
I'll try and dig it up for you later.
Splendid.
But either way, so, like, you compare that, you know, where the focus is on how it makes the male character feel, to, like, Dick Grayson multiple times in canon gets sexually assaulted. It's not really acknowledged as such. So it's like the whole, whether the character is acknowledged as a victim, but it's through somebody else's perspective and somebody else's actions versus whether they're not acknowledged as a victim at all, like sort of the two sides of the patriarchy.
I just want to say I love the discussion that came out of this. The back and forth is always really exciting to be like, hey, this, that, and the other thing. And it relates perfectly to like how trauma is treated and how disability is treated differently for characters, and just in general in media. It's like, it's sometimes just really, really mind-numbing. Like, I think I can say this to the audience, and to you guys in particular, do not watch 2018 Predator. The Predator movie that came out in 2018, do not watch it. Because the literal plot of that movie is this jacked up asshole, super genetically modified predator comes to Earth trying to find a kid who is on the autism spectrum and steal his autism to make him a better hunter.
That is a very strange plot. I did not have stealing someone's autism as a plot in my head.
It's so stupid, and it doesn't make any sense, and it's like, and they treat autism as this grandiose, almost superpower, and it's like, I understand that you're trying not to like downplay us autistic folks, but we're not superhuman. We're just
no. I've had discussions with this with a friend of mine who has ADHD, and there are elements to having autism and ADHD that, when you remove them from the context that we exist within a capitalist society that does not treat or respect our different mental statuses, there are advantages and disadvantages to having these types of mental traits
right. It comes out
a
as a net
traditional
neutral, though, right?
Neolithic human society.
Yeah, in my view, it comes out as a net neutral. Like, I obviously have great, for example, I have a great memory and have hyperfixation on evolutionary history, but, you know, my autism does come with caveats. It's neither good nor bad overall. It's just, when you stack it all up, autism is a net neutral, in my mind.
But, like, being autistic, on my end, I am very good at doing mindlessly repetitive, almost, tasks that most other people get very bored or tired doing. I can do them for, like, hours at a time and, like, lose track of time doing them.
Same here.
That is an extremely useful task for farming.
Right. Oh, wait, that's right. You grew up on a yak farm, right?
Yes. But, like, just for any type of farming, from, like, raising animals to growing crops to harvesting from wild ferns and stuff, autism provides a really useful trait that gives us an advantage that non-autistic people don't have.
Right.
So there are some level of superpower to being autistic. Just, I'm not so sure it would really help with hunting, just because stimulus overrides feels like you would get... You would lose track of your prey more often than you would be able to hyper-focus on hunting your prey.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing I was trying to get at. It's like, autism, yes, there are things that us autistic folks can do better than normal folks. But that doesn't make it, like, an overall superhuman advantage, right? Mm. We're not the next stage in human evolution. We're just different. Did you have something to say about that, Juliana?
I was just saying that I thought that Honey's example with the farming was interesting. So I was like, I hadn't thought about it that way before. And it's an interesting way to think about it. So and then, the conversation moved on.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everybody got a say in that. And I understand, yeah, it has some advantages, it has some disadvantages. For me, like, in my mind, autism can have its advantages, but, it's the same as somebody who is a better runner than somebody else, right? That's how I see that. So they have the advantage over other people.
I mean, okay, but so would you feel the story would have been similar if the person tried to steal Usain Bolt's legs or something?
You mean like the alien super predator?
Yeah, the super predator was trying to steal Usain Bolt's legs to run super fast, as opposed to stealing the brain of an autistic person to think super fast.
Well, the genes of autism. See, that's where it gets complicated, because there's a clear benefit for a hunter to be able to move faster, whereas I don't see the strict benefit of taking the genes for autism to try and make yourself a better hunter. I don't see that benefit.
Well, okay, because I can see a little bit of it. If this guy, because this is a super advanced sci-fi thing, I'm assuming this guy, if he's taking these genes, he has the ability to turn these genes on and off. in this situation, being able to just turn on the ability to hyper-focus at a moment's notice, the ability to just hyper-fixate on a task for endless hours without stopping, but then being able to just turn it off whenever, like, the sensory overload kicks in, that sounds like a superpower.
Interesting. I don't know if I'm super comfortable with that level of like stuff, because again, it leads to this whole thing of, hey, autistic folks are the next stage of an evolution. We're better than everybody else, when really.
No, I just think that there are two, like, if you were to steal a genetic abnormality from a human race, autism is not, like, the last choice I would go with. It's definitely a choice that has its options.
Right, and, like,
Yeah.
the only issue is that I don't know if Shane Black was thinking with that level of nuance when he was working on The Predator. You know what I mean?
Also, like, you know, because it affects your entire brain, so, like, being able to turn the stuff on and off wouldn't be a possibility. Like, I'm proud of thinking of all of the positive sides of autism. I'm glad I'm autistic and not allistic.
Yeah.
But, how was it portrayed in the movie? Was it like turning it on and off, or was it just like they didn't think it much?
Admittedly, it's been a few years because the movie came out in 2018 when I last saw it, but from my understanding, he wanted
and they still did this? I thought you were describing a plot from like 2003 or something. What the fuck? It's 2018!
Yep. Yeah, this was, if I were to be specific, the Shane Black Predator movie came out September 6th, 2018.
Screw all the benefits of the doubt I was giving it. I thought this was like an older movie that had like lesser understandings of like what is okay and what is not okay. This was fucking 5 years ago!
Yep, this was, hold on, September 6th, 2018. It was the day before Marvel's Spider-Man came out.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Yeah, and like the movie before it, Predators from July 2010, was way better of like a modern-ish Predator movie, because the Predator franchise has been around since '87. So I don't blame you, honey, for thinking that this is like a early 2000s plot, because it would have lined up with like the timeline of the Predator series. But nope, this fucking ridiculous this fucking ridiculous take on autism inside of a Predator movie came out in 2018.
You lost me, film. You lost me.
Yeah, you gave Shane Black up. I mean, again, I understand where you're coming from, so all I'll say is that, yeah, Shane Black was given a little bit too much credit, but when you realize it's like that credit was gone. So, Honey's turn to talk about their favorite disabled characters, since we've gone on this crazy tangent.
Alright, I was going to talk about, I was very tempted to talk about James Jr., but I held myself back because we have an entire video. Go watch our video that we did on James Gordon Jr. I have a lot to say about that.
Yeah.
But I actually instead want to talk about the very first mentally ill super character that I ever came in contact as a kid, who I immediately latched onto and identified as a child. Hank Pym Yellow Jacket.
Oh?
Yes, I mean, I grew up being mentally ill very much as a defining part of my childhood upbringing. I was diagnosed at a very early age. I very much grew up very mentally different from all of my other peers and classmates. I grew up feeling like a very different person mentally, and so mental illness was like it's hard to. I basically told myself, I described my experience growing up as a kid as like being an immigrant without an actual country to return home to. And seeing a character, and because of that, I often was very bullied a lot of the time because of being mentally ill. And oftentimes that often translated to feeling kind of villainized sometimes. And so seeing a character in superhero comics who is literally villainized because of his mental illness, he was made a villain because of a mental illness that he had, was very, imprintable for me as a kid.
Yeah, understandably. Like, if this is something that I did not know about Hank Pym in the slightest.
Yes, Hank Pym has he was initially diagnosed as having schizophrenia back in the 80s, or maybe it was actually I think it might have been all the way back to the 70s, or the 60s even. God damn it! When was Ultron's birth? That was long ago.
Later on suggested it might have actually like blah.
This is Marvel, so you guys are without me.
Yeah.
This was 1968. So wow. Yeah, them not really understanding mental illnesses diagnosed him as having schizophrenia. Modern times, they have changed the diagnosis to bipolar disorder.
Right.
Which, I still don't really, it's still they're basically just using a mental illness to explain away supervillain behavior. But at the very least, they're going with something that's a little easier to believe than schizophrenia in this situation.
Especially considering, again, the initial diagnosis of schizophrenia was in 1968. This was 1 year after the 1967 Spider-Man cartoon and 2 years after Batman 66 came into existence.
Yeah.
Hold on. I'm going ahead. I gotta look something up real quick.
So him being mentally ill, he's been a villain for the majority of his time since then. And a lot of the time, DC fans have latched onto him being irredeemably evil because of some key specific moments that he did when he was having his mental breakdown in 1968. And because, for context, he was apparently feeling like he was an underappreciated member of the team, and he was having some sort of intense mental breakdown because of undiagnosed mental illnesses issues, and so he invents a supervillain to attack the Justice League that only he could defeat, this case being Ultron.
Wait, did you mean the Avengers?
Yeah, sorry, the Avengers. He did not do this to do the Justice League, no.
Also, did you mean Marvel instead of DC when it came to the...
Way too much DC Comics. My brain sometimes flips the two around sometimes.
That's okay. That's okay. Just so that we're on the same page.
But yeah, so he invents Ultron to attack the Justice League, attack the Avengers, and in his mental breakdown, he goes and does the famous just bitch slap backhand against his wife, Hope Van Dyne, and
the infamous backhand.
Yes, the infamous thing. And a lot of fans obsess over bringing that up as him being completely irredeemable, but a lot of them completely forget over the fact that Peter Parker also backhanded his wife in a moment of extreme mental breakdown and panic. The difference is Peter Parker doesn't have a diagnosable mental illness to explain his mental breakdown. He was just having a mental breakdown.
Right.
And so everyone forgets about Peter Parker doing it, but loves to slander Hank Pym over his thing. It's double standards that and all that type of stuff.
Double standards being something that we've had to deal with a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so so my attachment to Hank Pym is not exactly it's not here's a character I laud and as a great representation of mental health, and like your two characters are disability people who this is a great representation. More, this is a realistic representation that I can identify as a person with mental illness, rather than this is something that I laud for being good.
Right. And one thing to keep in mind, since you mentioned this was in 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. So
yeah, this was a long time ago.
This gives a great frame of reference for how old and wildly, hilariously that portrayal of schizophrenia would be by today's standards.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, because it's been such a long time, and they did change his diagnosis to bipolar disorder, there have been attempts to deal with it in a healthy way, in one situation being Nadia Van Dyne. One interesting detail about Hank Pym's backstory that was not really dealt with until, like 5-6 years ago when Nadia Van Dyne debuted, is that his original backstory was that his first wife was kidnapped and taken away by Hydra agents, and he became a superhero to try to track her down and save her, but she was then believed to have died, and he moved on and eventually fell in love with Nadia Van Dyne. They eventually retconned that she had been pregnant with Hank's daughter when that had happened, and she had been raised in sorry, not Hydra, the Russians, evil Russians in this, because she was raised in the Red Room, the same place that did, like, Scarlet Witch and stuff.
Black Widow?
Yeah, Black Widow, yeah, sorry. And so, when she was eventually brought back, at this point in time, Hank Pym was dead, and so she was taken in by Hope Van Dyne as effectively a surrogate daughter, and they reveal that Nadia Van Dyne also suffers from an inherited mental illness, in this case bipolar disorder, that she inherited from her father. And they actually handle it incredibly well. For one part, she straight up just starts to decide, well, I must become a supervillain now because I have a mental illness, and she's having a full-on manic depression episode that she has to be snapped out of it because this is her first real depression episode that she's going through, and she doesn't know how to deal with it, and she's like about to just like go into like suicidal supervillainy because she's been trained by society to see any amount of mental illness as a sign for supervillainy.
But it isn't, and Nadia Van Dyne becomes the new Wasp, right?
Yeah, she becomes the unstoppable Wasp, and she has some amazing stories that she gets to tell about dealing with mental illness. And it's a fantastic thing. The one detail I'm not a huge fan of is they still basically villainize Hank Pym himself by, like, they don't really acknowledge a lot of the stuff that he did was while he was having an intense mental breakdown and then having zero emotional support the entire rest of his life because he was ostracized because he was still having mental breakdowns as a supervillain.
Right.
So it wasn't exactly like he was getting any help or any assistance during this time and just left to become a monster. But they still just sort of like treat it as if it was entirely his fault for the things that he did. And they treat it more as Nadia's problem that she has to deal with rather than a real inheritable problem that both of them have had to deal with.
Yeah.
So I will say a lot of times, especially when you're getting into like potential real world stuff like domestic violence, something can be obviously influenced by your mental illness. I just hope there's no like narrative that his wife that he hits has to forgive him or whatever because you can do something, but it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not trying to hand wave away or like forgive Hank for the stuff he did. My issue with the earlier comment about Peter Parker was more that that incident with Hank Pym and his wife happened 60 years ago at this point, and people still bring it up as like a sign that he is an irredeemable monster, when 30 years later Peter Parker does the same thing and nobody tries to bring it up that Peter Parker is irredeemable.
Yeah, so that makes sense. It's just, kind of like a slightly thing I wanted to make sure was it there.
Yeah, I should have worded that a little better, yeah.
That's all right. Important communication is important and key. And this sort of thing is also...
Well, actually, before we switch over to the next topic, I want to bring up one other character in the Van Dyne family, or the Pym Van Dyne family, that also suffers from the exact same mental illness. And DC, I'm pretty sure, has never actually addressed for having such a mental illness.
Marvel.
Is Ultron himself. Because the way artificial intelligence works within this genre, this section of Marvel, is that you can't actually create fully synthetic human-level intelligence by scratch. You have to replicate an existing human brainwave pattern and attach that onto a computer circuit to mimic. In Hank Pym's case, he used his own identical brainwave patterns to create Ultron. And so by that proxy, Ultron as well should be suffering from the same mental illnesses that Hank Pym has, and I don't think they've ever actually, addressed that literally by effect. I think they tend to gloss over the fact that Ultron is also suffering from mental illness.
Interesting. that's certainly something to think about for later on. But we are going to very quickly move on to number 3, the iconic disabled people in history. And as a Canadian, I would be completely remiss, check the show notes for this one, if I were not to talk about this man, Terry Fox. He is pretty much he is one of the most inspiring individuals in Canadian history. He created the Marathon of Hope. His idea, the whole thing is that, as you can see, he has a prosthetic leg. These pictures were taken in 1980 because he died in 1981, and he had cancer, and the cancer was bone cancer in his leg, so they cut off his right leg. And to kind of inspire people to take cancer seriously and to realize that, just because this is a fantastic slogan here, that just because he has this disability doesn't mean that he's going to give up. He's not a quitter. His goal, that unfortunately he was unable to finish because he died before he could do it, was to run from one coast of Canada to the other. He had a caravan so that he could rest up during the evening, but his goal was to effectively run from the east coast to the west coast of Canada by himself. And he inspired millions of Canadians, and we literally just had the 41st anniversary of the 42nd anniversary of the Terry Fox run, or the 42nd anniversary of the Terry Fox run is actually coming up.
Never really got irregular anniversary dates, because you could just say it's been X number of years since it happened. Unless it's a milestone date, sorry, this is just me being weirdly autistic in this situation. I don't really get people saying it's the 22nd anniversary, or it's the 7th anniversary, or it happened 7 years ago.
Point is, it's been over 40 years, and us Canadians do not stop Terry Fox's dream, and I think that's really cool and super important.
Sorry for getting hung up on that little detail.
That's all right. So yeah, that is my pick for a real person who a real individual who did the Terry Fox run, or who inspired the Terry Fox run and cancer research as a whole, which is good stuff. So, who's next?
Me. I am next, and I am going to talk more on a sad note and talk about I'm having a brain fart on his first name for a second. Just a second.
No worries.
No. Alan Turing.
Oh, I know about Alan Turing.
So Alan Turing was both a gay and autistic computer scientist engineer who single-handedly basically served as a supercomputer for the U.S. military during the major world wars, decoding and deciphering military intelligence that they were able to acquire.
Yeah.
And he also was the guy who invented the Turing test, which a lot of people do not use correctly, because a lot of people use it as some sort of objective marker that, if a computer can achieve the Turing test, then it is capable of actual sentience. The thing is, a lot of people can't pass the Turing test. And the whole point of the Turing test was actually to show how limiting our perception of what human sentience is, and how we tend to be incredibly judgmental and limiting towards other humans, and it can be, and also we don't really have a proper understanding in and of itself of what actual sentience and intelligence is, because this category that everyone sort of defined as, yes, this would make a qualifying candidate for what if a computer is sentient, doesn't actually qualify for a bunch of actual people. And so it's a masterful example of how of autism, and how he was trying to explain to people that autism is how autism works with people and how it can be ignored and hidden away and not really noticed because they don't consider it intelligence and they consider it like a form of mental degeneracy. And sadly, Alan Turing, it's like 70 years later, and people still don't really understand the message you were trying to tell people.
Yeah, it's like...
That was really interesting because I didn't know that about the Turing test, so now I'm going to be thinking about it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of the best parts about doing these casts is getting windows into things that one might have initially considered and then realize, wait, it's very, very different. This is one of my favorite things about talking to other people in other lives is realizing, oh, previous conceptions about how you are could be very different from what somebody else would have. So, what about you then, Juliana?
So, I did not prepare a ton about this because I, wrote, somewhat self-depreciatingly in my notes. I'm a cringe. So I don't have a ton down, but I do have one Mexican artist who I don't know if everyone knows who Frida Kahlo is, right? She's one of the more famous Mexican artists.
No, sadly.
Exactly. She is one of the most famous Mexican artists, and she does these paintings, and she normally portrays herself with a unibrow. That's how she looked, and sort of people sometimes meme her, but she was very important and very influential, and she did self-portraits, and she also people who are familiar with Frida Kahlo normally know, she was a very important painter. She did self-portraits. She married Diego Rivera, who was another very influential Mexican painter. He was a muralist. And so that's what people know, and they know something of her politics. They don't really always know that she was disabled. She had polio when she was a child, and she got in an accident where she received spinal damage, and she had some type of chronic pain. I know I've seen some people say that she had fibromyalgia, but I have not found a source on that, so it's just something happened that she had chronic pain. So I'm putting it on a spoilered image in Discord because it's slightly not safe for work. This is a painting she did of herself, how she feels basically after her accident. It's called The Broken Column. And you can see, the metal spinal column and the nails sticking out there, which is a very evocative imagery. And even though it's not safe for work, it's not titillating. It's just showing how she feels. And then my favorite quote from her, which is, "Pies para que los necesito, or para que los quiero si tengo alas para volar," which is feet. What do I need them for? What do I want them for if they have wings to fly? So I always like that quote when we're talking about disabilities.
Can you post that quote in the show notes, please?
Sure, and I'll post it with
the translation too, because
feet. What do I want them for if I have wings with which to fly?
That's pretty cool. I gotta say, Juliana being fluent in Spanish makes me feel a little bit jealous. Because unfortunately no habla en español, but but that's very cool. And I'm glad we got to learn about two prominent Mexican individuals who were disabled, one by a terrifying disease. I've heard horror stories about polio, and the other artist, I forget, what did he have? Sorry?
It was Frida. Frida had both of them. She had polio when she was a kid, and she got into the accident when she was older. So she had polio, and then she got into the accident.
Oh, I see.
That caused her spine and pelvic damage and made her have more pain.
Ouch. That is... Ugh. I do not envy that poor woman, but, she didn't let that slow her down, and that's always very cool to see. Now, I'm gonna have to get a little bit creative with the censoring on this one, but that's okay because it's whatever. It's art, and if YouTube's gonna be pressy about it, then fine, so be it.
Just put the Mexican flag over the nipples.
Would that be okay?
I think where you could just like blur it, you know.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the initial idea that I had in mind.
Yeah.
Anywho,
Mess around with censorship by like doing creative little censoring blobs to say fuck you to censors.
it's fun to do that, but you know what? There's nothing wrong with the classic blur too. It's all good. Nowza bowza. We are on to the final point of this cast, and we're actually making pretty good time, and that makes me very happy because there have been casts like this that have run over 5.5 hours, so I'm really glad that we've actually kept it under an hour so far.
It helps that there's only 3 of us.
That's so true. Right, so Honey, you went first on point 3, so I'm actually going to have Mono's notes pop in first. And then
I did not go first on. I haven't gone first on anything except what my disability is.
Oh, so okay. So would you like me to read Mono's thing next, or would you like to go ahead?
You can have Mono go. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Cool. Or Mono go post thingy. So for the 4th question, which is for those following along, what disability aids do you want to see more often? What are some issues you want addressed? Their 4th question is, I think it'd be really cool to see more characters using wheelchairs, hearing aids, prosthetics / mechanical limbs, etc., as well as stuff like sign language to provide more representation for disabled people out there. I especially find it wholesome when children's media does that because out there it'll make a child who shares that disability happy and makes them feel like they aren't out of place. In brackets, not sure how to phrase that. I think I know what they're getting at here. And I do like that, and that is one of the main reasons why I was really happy to see this in Spider-Man Miles Morales, at least, and something that has been expanding into other games since then that has made me really happy to see, but we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get to my point. But talking about how more characters should be shown with disabilities, Haley in Spider-Man Miles Morales has a visible hearing aid and uses sign language. And you can choose to have, for her to have somebody who is deaf, I believe, speak, quote-unquote, speak her sign language if you're viewing something, if you're playing the game without subtitles, so that you can understand what she's saying if you don't know sign language. Or you can just turn the voice off and have the subtitles play for her so that if you don't understand sign language, you can do that. Or you can just read her sign language alongside Miles Morales, because Miles knows sign language in this universe. But I like that because it's like, hey, I'm glad that the people are understanding that representation is important, God damn it. So, Honey, you're up next.
Alright. I probably am the negative Nancy here, because I do not just want a bunch of heroic, awe-inspiring stories, people with like disabilities achieving great odds and great success, and I also don't want a lot of stories of people who are like that are just depressing stories of disability, because the thing is a lot of times the downtrodden things are used to victimize us and infantilize us and make us seem worthless, but also the big uplifting stories of heroic, awesome disabled people are often used to invalidate and infantilize the rest of us, because they're like, oh, why aren't you as amazing and awesome as this other person who has a disability? I just want normalcy. I want people to just be able to exist and be like just a part of the story, just a character who happens to have a disability or mental illness, who doesn't even, they don't even bring it up outside of like moments where it's like important for them to actually bring up that they have a disability, but rather they're just out there explicitly showing that they have a disability but behaving like every other character. That's why I kind of actually prefer, in terms of adaptations, the I forget his name, I think his name's Freddy from the Captain Marvel movies.
Oh yeah, Freddy from Shazam.
Yes, from Shazam, yeah. Where he's kind of just a douchey asshole kid, but he's a douchey asshole kid who has crutches and walks with a disability. Like, he is just a normal kid in every other way beyond that. He's not, like, especially heroic more than any other person in the story. He's not rising above his station. He's just a normal kid who also happens to have a disability.
And there's nothing wrong with having, you know, with more normalcy is certainly never going to hurt, for sure. And I do understand where you're coming from with that.
I just feel like that if we prioritize focusing too much on the uplifting, awesome stories of people striving against all odds, it creates the expectation that we shouldn't need any support or assistance from society or from our community or from the government, because look at all these already existing examples of people striving against all odds to do things.
Yeah, and one thing I also really like, tying back to Babs, is not necessarily just the moments where Babs is being the super hacker badass or fighting off half a dozen government goons by herself. There's moments in the comics where it's just like, she's just getting out of bed using her aids. There's times where she's playing basketball with a wheelchair club. There's moments of normalcy there that, more of that definitely isn't going to hurt, in my opinion.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think when I think of this, I'm thinking of, narrative equality. Like, you're pointing out Freddy is just, a regular teenager. And, he can be a douche, just like every other teenager. And Babs, she does heroic things, but we see moments of her getting out of bed. But in the context of a superhero comic, her stuff is narratively equal to an able-bodied superhero. It's not like she goes above and beyond in terms of being, some superhuman being. She's heroic like the other superheroes are, and she has her regular, everyday routines with the, mobility devices like the other, not like other disabled people do, and she can beat a bunch of people up like the other heroes can. Did you have more to say, or should I segue into my thing?
Go ahead onto your end, yeah.
So I was going to say, with the whole, because I'm sort of building off what you said, with the whole narrative equality, showing the normalcy and disabled characters just being normal, and you can need, you said you can need societal help. You don't, it's not like you should have to do everything alone or look at these inspiring people, so you should be just like them. One of the characters in the play, I was talking about earlier, Mi Pietro Rosetta, she is Victoria, the woman who uses the wheelchair. She is very narratively equal to the other characters. And so, we do see some focus on her disability in terms of she talks about how she can't leave the house without an aid, because that's specifically when she's talking about how she can meet up with her friend. But her disability is never a point of pity or a point of, she perseveres inhumanly. She talks about the times she can't leave the house, and she feels bad asking her parents to help her out because she knows that they're tired, so she will sometimes sit in her room and just study her sheet music. So it talks about she's treated narratively the same way that the other characters are in terms of having her own difficulties. I'm sorry, choking up. It's not very clever.
You okay?
And she has the same narrative difficulties as the other characters do, and weight. So it's not a piteous thing. It's not inspiring. She's just allowed to be a person.
And I like that because, again, that leads back to what Honey wants, is that the normalcy can be relative. Barbara being normal in the superhero community is going to make her above normal for all of us, sure.
Yeah.
But Victoria being the normal and a normal person, basically, in their normal story, that works just as well, right? So
Yeah.
So I quite like that, and
that's why I framed it as narrative equality, because you can compare it to how the other characters are treated.
Yeah.
And in terms of what we'd like to see more of, should I go into what I had initially before I started building off what Honey said, or?
Go ahead.
Go on
So
ahead.
I had, in terms of the age, yeah, obviously I want to see more wheelchairs because wheelchairs look cool, and especially the ones that are ultralight wheelchairs. I don't think that you shouldn't show transport chairs or chairs that are cheap, because some people do use those because they can't afford any better chairs. But if it makes sense for a character's circumstances, you should make sure to do research and get them the chair that would work for them. Barbara Gordon would have a very presumably expensive wheelchair, ultralight. That means it weighs probably less than 12 pounds, so ultralight counts as things below 20 or so pounds. And she would have like a really nice cushion and a fancy back probably, and it would be customized because she is wealthy. But another character who's on Social Security or something might have a cheap chair, because even though they do need one that's better, they can't afford one, and the healthcare, Medicaid, whatever you have does not always pay for a good one. So basically, wheelchairs to fit character situations. In terms of what I want to see visually, trope-wise, a disabled life as worth living. I know I mentioned in the play, Mi Piedra Rosetta, there is a question of suicide. One of the characters is very suicidal, and I mentioned specifically it's not Victoria. So it's a character, he got in an accident, he has an injury that's portrayed as temporary, but that was like after he started feeling suicidal. Like, he was walking in the street, and he says he can't remember whether he was intending to walk in front of a car or just walking. So the accident sort of like is not what caused him to feel this way, it's more of a result of it. And the question as to whether Victoria's life is worth living is never called into question. We do see that she has difficulties that an able-bodied person wouldn't have because of societal inequality, and the way that since this play takes place in Spain and was written by a Spaniard, the way that Spanish society fails disabled people, obviously many societies fail disabled people. It's not unique to Spain. And, since this has been so comics focused, also the way that pre-New 52, Barbara Gordon refers to her life after becoming disabled as it's different and maybe even better than it was before. She can do more as Oracle than she could as Batgirl. So you see a disabled life as both worth living and can even be better than the life you had before.
Indeed.
And you compare that to post-New 52 Barbara Gordon, when they've given her the spinal implant and she can walk again. She's terrified of the idea of becoming disabled again. If you read the comics, they're like, oh, we fixed it. It's not sexist anymore because she can walk and the Killing Joke took away her ability to walk. But no, they push that narrative that she's helpless in the face of her trauma and Joker so much harder post-New 52. She's she can't even say his name or whatever, but pre the magic curing, she could beat him up, or she doesn't even need to beat him up. She just manipulated him. He was not registered for concern. A more complicated example with this is, I know we were talking about the narratives that people take from disabled characters. Honey was talking about taking some narratives as super inspiring, and people are like, why aren't you like them? One of the Spanish language media I did my research on when I was in school was Mar Adentro, with a C inside, which is complicated because it's loosely based on a true story of a real person. So there was a disabled man's narrative in here at one point. Ramon San Pedro he was basically advocating for his right to die. But the way, and that's obviously something that I cannot possibly know the way that he did, what his quality of life was like and how he was like. So that's something that I'm not going to say he shouldn't have done that, because that's his life. I'm talking about specifically the movie where they reframed the narrative to push that forward as the only narrative for a disabled character. They pushed any characters who are quadriplegic or not and not wanting to die. They did not allow them to use their arguments for the dignity of a disabled life. They just had the characters say things like, well, you shouldn't want to die because your life isn't your life, it's God's life. Because the guy was religious, the guy was arguing with him. Or they were saying, well, so they basically took this thing that should be a neutral stance, but that a disabled person makes, and they reframed it into a tragedy porn narrative where any inaccessibility that the person had, or Ramon had, was treated as like his disability as the thing is stopping him, not the lack of accessibility. Like his family eats dinner downstairs and he doesn't eat their dinner with them because he's quadriplegic and can't climb the stairs. There's no lift, there's no question about it. When the other quadriplegic character is there in the house, they frame the characters who carry his wheelchair upstairs to help him talk to Ramon as like a very inconvenient thing. Like they frame it in a very negative manner. Like look at how he's inconveniencing these people. So yeah, they're so this is not getting into the question of one particular person. What he wants to get into the question of the way the movie packages disability as this tragic thing, and they do craft a pro-euthanasia argument, whether they say they are or not, because another woman in the movie who has a padecil, which I cannot remember what it stands for sadly, disability that winds up making her she gets strokes and starts slowly losing functioning. She decides she wants to commit suicide after she meets Ramon, because she's worried she won't be able to do it physically on her own if she becomes like he is. This is despite the fact that the movie argues that it's not like wanting to commit suicide isn't contagious. They inadvertently prove that it is, and then when she does not, she starts to commit suicide, she's going to go through with it, but then stops. And the narrative treats it as like a cowardly act on her part. Then at the end of the movie, we see her in terms of how much functioning she's lost after she's had another stroke. We frame her very sad, sitting alone in a home, and she can't remember people who visit her, and if her life does have an upside, we can't see it. So they specifically take this real person story and craft it to be this narrative of disability as tragic for the able-bodied viewer. And if you look at the reviews, I think I saved one of the reviews, it was, viendo esta película, agradezco el poder de caminar y hacer otras cosas. So seeing this movie, I'm thankful for the ability to walk and do other things. So there's no, actually thinking about how a paraplegic or a quadriplegic person goes about their life here. There's no thinking about inaccessibility. The takeaway the audience has is, thank God I'm not disabled. So that's firmly in the category of the disabled life as tragedy for the abled viewer and is not worth living, which is sort of where I put the post-New 52 Barbara Gordon and Mara Dentro in the same category of that disability is tragic and it makes your life bad. It represents a bad point in your life versus pre-New 52 Barbara Gordon and Mi Piedra Rosetta, where it's either just a fact of life, it's a fact of life. It can be an obstacle, no one's going to say it's easy to relearn how to get around if you get paralyzed. No one's going to say it's convenient to require somebody to help you out of your house if you can't get out of your house alone. It's costly and it does come with downsides, but those downsides that can exist from the abled society that does not support disabled people enough. So my general thing I want to see more is pre-New 52 Barbara Gordon, Mi Piedra Rosetta, the disabled life as worth living.
Yeah. And kind of leaning into that, it's like one of the big things, and this personally bothers me, that this has to be a way in order to get people to take that idea seriously. But it is one of the things that it has to be, is the whole disabled people can't be loved in a romantic fashion, right? Because it's one of those things that infuriates me, that it has to be a part of their lives in order for them to be taken seriously, and yet it kind of has to be. So coming at that from that angle, pre getting shot, Babs was a fiance with a cop named Jason Barden, and it was not a great thing. And then when she was Oracle, she had two much better romantic relationships. One with Dick Grayson, which I'm personally on, but I respect Dick Babs people, so.
I don't respect Dick Babs people. You will not get respect from me.
I'm not fussed, but I do really like the relationship with Ted Kord. The point is that when Babs, as a disabled woman, had better romantic relationships and such than than she did when she was able-bodied. And this was also before they passed her around the Bad Family ridiculously. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I do think it supports it where we do see her in a relationship. So she had romantic tension with Ted Cord. When we do see her in a romantic relationship with Stick, she's never damseled for it. Like, we never see her portrayed as helpless. When she does get captured, she normally either takes part in her own rescue, and if she calls someone, it's usually the birds of prey. It's not Dick.
Yeah, it's usually your best buddies.
Yeah.
There's even, like, explicitly a story where she is being hunted by this super criminal organization, and, like, Dick has to, like, fight to get the opportunity to help because she just doesn't want him involved. She only wants the birds of prey involved.
Which story was that? I can't remember.
I don't remember either. It was like some...
was it some weird crossover?
Yeah, it was a tie-in multi-issue event.
Oh, I didn't read the crossover this many times, so that's why I couldn't remember it.
Yeah. So, the disability aids I want to see more often and issues I want to see addressed. This leads into my realm sphere, my second love after evolutionary biology, the entertainment industry. People, please, for the love of God, if you're making movies, writing books, making video games, make them more accessible to people. It's a great thing that I'm seeing in more video games like Marvel, like Guardians of the Galaxy has the most dynamic difficulty system I've ever seen. Like, you can have your presets, easy, normal, medium, hard, but you can make certain things auto-win and tweak ally health and stuff like that. There's more options. Just give people more options in general. I don't think people are going to complain because if they see an option that they don't need to use and don't want to use, they won't use it. Whereas people who do need to use it, for instance, any colorblind filters that will help colorblind players identify what kind enemies and allies in games a little bit easier, they can use that. And it's something that I can't, something as simple as difficulty settings is in effect an accessibility setting. And people still sometimes go after difficulty settings as if they never intended to have difficulty settings, they should never have difficulty settings to make it easier for the casuals. Well, what about the disabled people? You ever thought about them? You ever thought about how a disabled fan of Dark Souls might want to play Dark Souls? Jerk. Not you guys.
I have had so many people make an argument that because I have limited motor controls and can't perform motion inputs as easily as other people who do fighting games, that I should just not play those fighting games. I should go play Smash and stuff if I wanted a fighting game that allows for me to play without using motion inputs.
Which is...
no, fuck you. I want to play with all the other people.
Exactly. See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. More options are not going to bother me. That's why, unlike a lot of fighting game fans, I'm actually not that bothered by auto combos. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit about auto combos? Honestly, okay, one person who might have difficulty doing the combos needs to press one button several times to get a combo. Okay, and
and also, combos have been around for 20 years at this point. It's not some drastic, strange thing that needs to be addressed.
Exactly. I do not think, however, that motion inputs should go away. If you want to use motion inputs, go on ahead. But if you don't want to, or can't, then there should be the option to finagle with them,
Mm-hmm.
That's why I love the idea of macro buttons on hitboxes. Lord knows I can barely do a 360 to do a Zangief's command grab. But if that's a macro, all the better. But I also shouldn't have to be even a slight techno whiz and know what a macro is in order to make a game more accessible. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Or a movie more accessible, which is why when I saw Jurassic World Dominion in the theaters and I saw, sensory-friendly screenings were advertised at the theater, I'm like, that's great! Brighter lights, less noise, so that it's not so overwhelming, so you could still go enjoy the movies at the movie theater without having to worry about, getting so centrally overloaded that you literally cannot enjoy it anymore and basically overload, you know? Like, yes, please. And it's just one of those things where it's like, let people enjoy shit, God damn it. That's my takeaway. Let people enjoy shit, and don't be afraid of letting disabled people enjoy your things. If they enjoy it, that means that you did a good thing, people. Anyways, so that is the end of all of the topics. Any final thoughts that have crossed your minds?
No, I think I've discussed everything on my mind.
What about you, Juliana?
Yeah, I think I've kind of said everything on my mind to get to the posture pretty much.
Well, how did you enjoy your first time on the WraithCast?
It was very interesting, and there's lots of good food for thought. So I'm glad I got to talk with you too.
Awesome. Would you be remiss, or what's the word? Would you mind if I asked you to join me for a 0.5 episode where we could talk about, or you and I could talk about Oracle? Because a 0.5 episode is more of a one-on-one thing where we, Honey did it with James Gordon Jr., and then we can talk about Oracle. And I did it with another person in here, and we did 5.5 hours of Lady Shiva talk, so.
Oh, I'm torn between, do I want to, I want to hear so much about Lady Shiva, but do I want to listen for 5 minutes?
Well, we were
I would not be opposed to doing an Oracle talk, so we could, set something up like that. I would love to talk about Barbara Gordon more, obviously.
Yeah. Just give me a time that works for you, because I know you're pretty busy this summer with real stuff, so.
Yeah, probably will not be at least for another week, just based on the schedule, but I would love to talk about her.
And there's nothing wrong with that, so just whatever works for you. That's the important thing. I'm glad that you were able to make some time to join in, and I'm glad Bono was able to, at the very least, join partially. And, of course, Honey stopping by, too. Now, let me, guys, what am I saying? Guys, let me know in the description below your answer, what you feel about these 4 particular questions. I should have this up by the weekend, alongside the other 2 videos I recorded with Honey Saturday.
Yesterday. No, it was Saturday.
Yeah, it was Saturday, because we had to do some catch-up work, but that's besides the point. Don't forget to be awesome, my friends, and we'll see you guys on the other side. Bye-bye.
Don't give a damn!